There's something about eating in silence that feels more deafening than a shout. I sat across from my wife, Amber, at Veranda, a restaurant so polished and pristine it felt like we were dining inside a jewelry box. Soft jazz filtered through hidden speakers, the candlelight flickered just enough to make everything seem warm, and every waiter moved like they'd been choreographed. You didn't come here unless you had something to prove. Amber had insisted on this dinner for weeks, calling it a casual night to meet her boss. Casual. I wore the one tailored blazer I owned, and even that felt underdressed. She looked beautiful. She always did. Hair straightened and tucked behind one ear, her lips painted with the kind of confidence that came with power, not vanity. The kind of confidence that told you she didn't second-guess a thing she did. I used to admire that about her. I used to think it grounded us, my calm, her fire. Amber had this energy in public. She could hold a room with a glance. But tonight, she held it with something else, sarcasm. "This is Garrett," she said to Stephen, her boss, as we all sat down. "He's the quiet one. If you can get more than 5 words out of him, you've basically won the lottery." I gave a tight smile and extended a hand across the table. Stephen chuckled, the kind of laugh men use when they think they're in control. His grip was firm, his watch shiny and unnecessarily large. The handshake was brief, but his eyes lingered, curious, calculating. Amber was all charm. As the wine flowed, so did the commentary. "Garrett's allergic to networking," she said lightly, brushing her hand along Stephen's arm in that casual, too familiar way. "He'd rather read a manual on how to assemble a grill than go to a happy hour." Stephen laughed again. "He's a practical man. There's value in that." Amber waved off the compliment. "Practical is just code for boring." I blinked, forced a polite smile, and turned my attention to the bread basket. I didn't say anything. I knew better than to make a scene, but my appetite was already retreating. It wasn't the first time she joked at my expense in front of people. But tonight felt different. It wasn't teasing. It was performance. I watched her lean in just a little too close when Stephen whispered something to her. I watched her eyes narrow in that way she used to save just for me, the private smile, the shoulder tilt. Something inside me tensed. Stephen and I couldn't have been more opposite. He was loud in a way that didn't seem obnoxious, just assured. His stories were well-timed, his jokes well-practiced. He looked at Amber when he spoke, not me. And Amber? She soaked it in. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, I caught it, one of those moments where everything in the room fades except the person you're focused on. Amber and Stephen were laughing. She reached for his arm to steady herself, and he leaned toward her like gravity had shifted. Their eyes locked, too long, too close. The kind of look that carries weight. History. In * Macy. And just like that, I knew. I don't mean I suspected. I mean I knew. The way you know when something breaks inside you and there's no sound, just a shift in air pressure. A subtle, terrifying awareness. Amber looked over and caught me watching. Her smile didn't falter. If anything, it softened. As if to say, it's fine. You're imagining it. She tilted her head slightly, lips curling like I was an adorable fool for even noticing. Then she reached for her wine glass, sipped, and rejoined the conversation like nothing had happened. I excused myself to the restroom, not because I needed to go, but because I needed to breathe. Inside, I stood at the sink, staring at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. Older than I remembered. My jaw was tight. My hands braced the counter. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was stunned. Like I'd slipped through some invisible trapdoor and landed in a version of my life that wasn't mine anymore. By the time I returned to the table, the mood hadn't shifted. Amber was still radiant, still charming. Stephen seemed even more relaxed, his jacket off now, his sleeves rolled just enough to show off tanned forearms and the kind of confidence that says, I always get what I want. We finished dinner. She insisted on dessert. The conversation turned to future plans at her firm, Stephen hinting at promotions, travel, expansion. Amber's eyes lit up. I used to love that spark in her, but now it looked like it belonged to someone else. As we stood to leave, Stephen offered to call her a car. No need, she said quickly. Garrett's got it. He nodded and turned to me. Nice meeting you. She talks about you, sometimes. I smiled back, but I meant none of it. In the car ride home, the silence stretched. Amber scrolled through her phone, her expression unreadable. I drove, my knuckles tight on the wheel. Did you have fun? She asked suddenly. I didn't look over. Sure. Stephen's important to the company, she added like she was still defending something. He wanted to meet the man behind the curtain. I almost laughed. Is that what I am? The Wizard of Oz? No, she said, smiling faintly at her reflection in the window. You're the quiet one. Reliable. My anchor. There was that word again. Reliable. Predictable. Steady. Suddenly it felt like an insult. We pulled into the driveway and for a second neither of us moved. She finally broke the silence. Don't overthink it, Garrett. That's your problem. You read into things that aren't there. She didn't wait for a response. She got out of the car, heels clicking on the pavement, and disappeared into the house. I sat there for a while. Engine off. Lights dim. Just sitting in the dark, hearing her words echo in my head. Don't overthink it, Garrett. But it wasn't overthinking. It wasn't paranoia. Something had shifted. I felt it like a weight in my chest, dull and cold and unforgiving. And in that moment I realized I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was her audience. And I had just watched the first act of something I wasn't meant to see. You don't realize the moments that matter until they're behind you, until hindsight arranges them into a pattern you can't unsee. After that dinner at Veranda, everything started to click into place like a jigsaw puzzle I hadn't even known I was building. I lay in bed that night beside Amber, her breathing slow and steady, and stared at the ceiling while my mind replayed every odd moment I had brushed off over the last few months. It started with her staying late at work. At first, it made sense. She was on a new project, and Steven had a reputation for pushing his team hard. She used words like dedicated and driven when talking about the long hours. I'd even admired her commitment, proud of her rising star. But then the late nights multiplied. She started coming home well past 10, sometimes even midnight, with barely a text to say when she'd be back. When I'd ask how the meeting went, she'd respond vaguely, eyes glued to her phone, good. Just a lot of planning stuff. I had believed her. Because why wouldn't I? Then her appearance changed. It wasn't sudden, but it was definite. Amber had always been stylish, but practical, clean lines, subtle makeup, soft tones. Now she wore bold lipstick that left faint red marks on wine glasses, perfume that smelled expensive and foreign, heels taller than she used to tolerate. Her dresses clung a little tighter, her hair was styled even on weekends. At first, I chalked it up to the job. Her world was competitive and maybe she was just adapting. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. She started taking weekend trips too. Client development, she called it. Team building, she said once with a wink. I remember standing at the door with her duffel bag in my hand, confused why a team building event required an evening gown and lingerie I hadn't seen before. One Saturday afternoon, about a month before the dinner, I was cleaning out the back seat of her car while mine was in the shop. There was a crumpled receipt under the floor mat, nothing unusual at first. But then I noticed the name on it, Steven. Dinner for two. A bottle of Merlot that cost more than some of our utilities. Candlelight setting. The date matched a night she'd told me she was in Boston for a conference. When I showed it to her later, she didn't flinch. Oh, that, she said, waving it off. Company dinner. I didn't even notice he signed it. He usually handles expenses. We all went out. All? I'd asked. Well, a few of us. It wasn't just me and him, if that's what you're asking. I wasn't asking, but the fact that she said it told me she heard the question anyway. Then there was her phone, once left on the counter or face up on the nightstand, now always within reach, always face down, often set to do not disturb. When I mentioned it once, she laughed and told me she'd been reading too many productivity books. Less screen time, she said. You should try it. I did. I tried it because I wanted to believe her. I always wanted to believe her. But the more I thought, the more it all lined up. I remembered how distant she'd become when we were alone. Conversations that used to stretch late into the night now ended with, I'm too tired, babe, or let's talk about this later. We used to cook together, play cards, watch dumb reality shows. Then suddenly everything became a schedule, her schedule. A calendar filled with meetings and flights and people I never met. She stopped laughing at my jokes. She stopped touching me when we passed in the hallway. She stopped asking about my day. And I stopped offering. At some point, we had become two people coexisting in the same space, like neighbors who nodded politely but didn't knock on each other's doors anymore. She had her world. I had mine. And somewhere along the way, we'd stopped trying to bridge the gap. I remember one morning, I think it was late February, I tried to surprise her with breakfast. Pancakes, her favorite. I woke up early, even squeezed some fresh orange juice like I used to when we were dating. She came into the kitchen with her heels already on, jacket in hand. You didn't have to do this, she said. But she didn't sit down. 10 minutes, I said. Just eat with me. She looked at her phone. I can't. I'm running late. Steven's expecting us to prep for a pitch. I didn't say anything. She kissed my cheek, barely, and walked out the door. The pancakes went cold. That moment stuck with me. Not because of what she said, but because of how normal it felt. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just let her leave. That's what I'd become, someone who didn't ask questions because I was afraid of the answers. Looking back now, I see how the silence between us had grown so loud neither of us could hear each other anymore. I used to think relationships eroded with a single, catastrophic moment, but that's not how it happened with Amber and me. Ours was a slow unraveling. Threads pulling loose while we smiled for pictures and texted "love you" with emojis we didn't mean anymore. Still, I kept trying. I thought maybe if I gave her space, she'd come back around. That maybe this was a phase: stress, burnout, ambition. I told myself she was just distracted, not disconnected. And even when my gut screamed otherwise, I muted it with logic. With hope. That was my biggest mistake, thinking that love, by itself, could be enough. It wasn't. It never is. The Monday after the dinner, Amber came home late again. She didn't apologize. She didn't offer an excuse. She just slipped out of her shoes, poured a glass of wine, and started scrolling her phone. "I'm going to bed," I said. "Okay," she murmured, not looking up. I stood there for a beat, waiting for something, anything. A question. A touch. A sign that she still saw me. Nothing. As I walked down the hallway, I passed our wedding photo, the one we took on the beach in Maui. I remember how the wind had whipped her hair into my face and she laughed so hard we had to retake it 3 times. That picture used to make me smile. Now, it just felt like proof of how far we'd fallen. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. The room was dark, but my thoughts weren't. They were vivid, painful, looping. Every missed call. Every vague explanation. Every Friday she came home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. I saw it all now. And the truth, as much as I tried to avoid it, had finally caught up to me. Amber was slipping away. No, not slipping. She was already gone. I just hadn't been ready to see it. Some moments don't feel real until you replay them in your head 100 times. The day it happened was unremarkable: blue skies, traffic humming, people smiling at coffee counters like the world was fine. I had no idea I was walking straight into the moment that would change everything. I just remember sitting at my desk, working through code for a client whose name I've already forgotten when the thought struck me like a pinprick to the neck. I should surprise Amber. We hadn't seen much of each other lately. She was always working late, always busy. I hadn't tried to visit her office in months. I used to drop by sometimes, bring her coffee, say hi to her coworkers, make her laugh in front of the interns. But lately, it didn't feel like I was invited. Still, something about that day felt different. Like I needed to see her with my own eyes. Not a text. Not a voicemail. I needed something real. So I picked up her favorite coffee order, vanilla latte with oat milk, no foam, and told myself this was a good idea. Amber's office was in a tall glass building downtown. Polished floors, marble counters, security guards with polite eyes but zero warmth. I smiled at the receptionist, who didn't recognize me. That stung a little. "I'm here for Amber Sloan," I said. "Her husband." She tilted her head like she'd misheard. "Oh. Okay. Let me call up." She didn't seem convinced. I waited in the lobby, watching people in suits shuffle past like they were all in on something I wasn't. Finally, the receptionist hung up the phone. "She's in a conference room right now. Floor 11. You can head up." I thanked her and took the elevator, hands sweating around the coffee tray, heart thudding harder with every floor. I don't know why I was nervous. Maybe because I already knew, somewhere deep down, that I wasn't walking into a warm reunion. The elevator doors opened and I stepped out into a hallway lined with glass offices and muted carpeting. Her company had remodeled recently, more modern, she'd said. Everything looked cold, like a showroom. The silence was thick, like even the walls were holding secrets. As I passed a row of conference rooms, I slowed at the third one on the right. The blinds weren't fully drawn, just enough to let someone careless think they were hidden. That's when I saw her. Amber. Sitting on Steven's lap. Not laughing. Not talking. Just close. Too close. Her hands were behind his neck, tangled in the collar of his shirt. His arms were around her waist. She leaned in, her head almost touching his. Then her lips brushed the edge of his cheek. Not a kiss, not quite. Just enough to say more than words ever could. I froze. Time didn't stop. It just narrowed. The hallway faded. The noises, the lights, the smells gone. Just the two of them behind that glass, perfectly framed like a painting I'd never asked to see. My feet felt glued to the floor. There was no shock. No anger. Just stillness. I didn't knock. Didn't burst in. Didn't scream. I just watched. Watched the woman I had built my life around curl herself into someone else like I never existed. She didn't see me. Neither of them did. They were locked in their own little world, careless and open like no one would ever come looking. Maybe that's what hurt the most, how confident they were in their secrecy. Like I didn't matter enough to be feared. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds. Maybe longer. I don't know. Then I turned around, coffee still in hand, and walked back to the elevator. As the doors closed, I looked down at the latte cup in my hand. Amber's name was scribbled on the side, written with casual affection by some barista who had no idea what this cup had been meant to symbolize. It was stupid, but I kept thinking she'd never drink this now. She'd never know I even tried. When I reached the ground floor, I tossed the drink into the trash without a second thought and stepped out into the sun. The city buzzed on like it always did. Cars honked, dogs barked, someone was playing music from a speaker across the street. The world had moved on. Only I hadn't. I walked. No direction. Just away. Away from that building. Away from her. Away from whatever was left of the version of my life I thought I was still living. For hours, I wandered the city. I ended up on a bench in a park we used to walk through after dinner, the kind with families and runners and students taking phone calls. None of them knew I was sitting there, slowly unraveling. I must have looked normal. Just another guy on a lunch break, lost in thought. But I was breaking. Quietly. Without noise. And yet I wasn't crying. I wasn't raging. I just sat. Because if I moved too fast, I might fall apart completely. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream, it whispers. It seeps in through cracks and sits behind your eyes, heavy and still. That's what I felt. Not betrayal. Not jealousy. Just loss. The loss of a future I thought was ours. The loss of the woman I thought I knew. The loss of every moment we'd shared that now felt hollow. When I finally stood up and walked back to my car, it was already late. I didn't go home. I didn't want to face her. Not yet. I drove for a while, long enough for the sky to turn orange, then dark. Eventually, I parked outside a 24-hour diner we used to go to when we were younger. Back when our biggest argument was what movie to watch or whether we had enough money to split dessert. I didn't go in. Just sat there, watching the flickering neon sign. At one point, I pulled out my phone and looked at our photos. Vacations. Holidays. Lazy mornings with coffee mugs and bedhead. All of it still there. And yet, none of it felt real anymore. I didn't delete them. I couldn't. Not yet. But I knew this, I wouldn't be adding any new ones. That chapter was over. And the hardest part? I never even got to say goodbye. There were no fights. No shouting. No melodramatic confrontations or slammed doors. Just silence. That's how it ended. The morning after I saw her with Steven, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed for a few hours, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, waiting for the sun to make it all real. Amber came home sometime in the early hours, quiet as a breeze. I heard her kick off her heels, pad softly across the floor, then close the door to our bedroom without looking in on me. She didn't know I'd seen her. She didn't know the night before had already ended us. When dawn came, I moved with precision. No rage. No trembling hands. I packed only what mattered: clothes, a few books, my laptop, and a small box of things that still felt like mine. I didn't leave a note. I didn't text. I just left the documents on the kitchen counter, a printed joint account summary, a formal notice of my job transfer, and divorce papers, unsigned but prepared. I even clipped a pen to the top page. All she had to do was finish the process. I paused at the front door for a moment, hand resting on the knob. I looked back at the kitchen, at the life we'd built, framed photos on the wall, the tiny wine rack she insisted we needed, the apron she wore exactly once. Everything still looked intact. But I knew better. The damage had already been done. You don't need fire to burn something down. Sometimes silence is enough. I moved into a small, furnished apartment on the other side of town, temporary housing offered by the new firm. It was nothing like the house we'd shared, but for the first time in months I could breathe. The firm I joined was one Amber had often mocked. Their model's outdated, she once said. They're always playing catch-up. Maybe they were. But they'd offered me a lead developer role on a new platform, something bold, something unfiltered. I took it. What she didn't know was that the very project Steven had rejected in a board meeting 6 months ago, the one Amber called too ambitious, was now mine. I had pitched it once to her team and it got shelved. But here, it was reborn. And I poured everything into it. Code became therapy. Every keystroke dulled the pain, every wireframe helped me forget her voice, her perfume, her betrayal. I worked long hours not because I had to, but because I wanted to disappear into something that didn't lie to me. My new colleagues didn't ask much. I liked that. They respected the quiet, understood my focus. Over time, they started seeing me as more than just the new guy. They started listening. I had ideas. Vision. And suddenly, my name started circulating in industry chats, tech blogs, even LinkedIn buzz. I was becoming someone again. Not someone's husband. Just someone. I ignored Amber's messages for the first few days. She sent one-word check-ins at first. Then a voice memo, "I saw the papers. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. She didn't try harder. And honestly, that hurt more than anything. A part of me, maybe a stupid, desperate part, thought she'd fight. That she'd chase me down, ask for forgiveness, break into sobs. That she'd make a scene even. But she didn't. She just let me go. I heard about her downfall weeks later through a colleague I used to share drinks with during conferences. He messaged me late one night, "Hey, man? Is it true you and Amber split?" I stared at the message for a while before replying, "Yeah." He followed up with a **T, an internal memo from her firm. Amber's name had been scrubbed from the executive roster. Rumors were flying. Some said she was fired. Others hinted at a leave of absence. It didn't take long for the truth to reach me. Stephen had thrown her under the bus during a board inquiry. Apparently, someone tipped off HR about a personal entanglement that had led to compromised company decisions. The affair had triggered an internal audit. Expense reports got flagged. Those client trips turned out to be romantic getaways billed as business development. Stephen, ever the survivor, claimed ignorance. Said Amber misrepresented the nature of their outings. She was blamed for ethical violations, poor judgment, conflict of interest. And just like that, her career, the one she'd built from scratch, started to crumble. By month's end, she was gone. No official statement. Just disappeared. Stephen? Still there. Still smiling for press releases, still shaking hands with investors. He didn't return her calls, from what I heard. He moved on fast. Of course he did. Amber had been discarded. And I wish I could say I felt satisfaction. That seeing her lose everything gave me closure. But it didn't. It just made me sad. Sad that the woman I once knew, the woman who danced in the kitchen and cried at Pixar movies and insisted on naming our wireless network Pretty Fly for a Wi-Fi, was now a stranger whose life had imploded in silence. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just end relationships. It rewrites people. I never replied to her last message. Just 2 words, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for hours. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I did. I said nothing. She never followed up. And in the days that followed, as I poured myself deeper into my work, I began to rebuild, not from rage or revenge, but from clarity. I started reconnecting with the version of myself I had abandoned to be her husband. I played my guitar again. I ran in the mornings. I called my brother, the one I used to dodge during family holidays. I watched the sun rise from the window of my tiny apartment while drinking terrible coffee and reading sci-fi books I'd long forgotten I loved. And every time her face tried to appear in my thoughts, I let it come and then let it pass. That was the secret, not suppressing the pain, but letting it pass through me. There was no dramatic confrontation. No emotional trial. Just the truth. The quiet kind. The kind you carry alone until it finally stops hurting. It's strange watching someone you used to love fall apart from a distance. Amber's unraveling didn't happen overnight. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet. Systemic. Like watching a building crumble one brick at a time while everyone inside insists it's just a little remodeling. I didn't seek out updates, but they came anyway. First, it was a LinkedIn update. Her senior strategy director title vanished, replaced with nothing. Then came a tip from an old colleague who emailed me with an all-too-innocent, "Hey, did you hear about Amber?" Crazy stuff. I didn't respond, but I read the email 3 times. According to him, the whole thing started when the company's CFO flagged inconsistencies in executive travel reports. Routine audit, he said. Just a quarterly check. But it revealed that Amber had signed off on reimbursements for trips labeled client development, outreach expansion with invoices that didn't match known vendor patterns. One destination in particular stood out, a luxury resort in Napa. I remembered that weekend she told me she was in Phoenix at a leadership summit. Said it was boring and packed with back-to-back panels. Turns out she was sipping wine with Stephen and expensing room service under some fabricated agenda called vendor onboarding. Stephen, when pressed, claimed Amber managed all logistics. He said he simply attended to support the initiative. Classic corporate distancing. No emails directly tying him to the deception, no receipts signed in his name. Amber had them all. The board launched a deeper investigation. Word got out, whispers at first. Then a few blog posts from anonymous industry insiders. Sources say a high-ranking executive was dismissed after misconduct. The pieces were easy to put together. Those who knew knew. And she was out. No farewell post. No goodbye drinks. Just erased. I heard she tried to do damage control. Reached out to allies. Scheduled quiet coffee meetings. told people she was exploring new opportunities, taking a breath, realigning her goals. But no one was buying it. Steven ghosted her completely. Not a message, not a call, not even a statement of support. The man she'd risked her marriage and career for turned invisible the second things got difficult. I shouldn't have been surprised, but still, there was something uniquely cruel about that kind of abandonment. They hadn't been discreet. Enough people had seen the closeness, the glances, the working weekends. Once Amber was no longer useful, Steven cut the rope. The final blow came in the form of a press release, her former company restructuring its leadership team. New names. A new division. A subtle line about refocusing values. No mention of Amber. Not even a footnote. I imagined her sitting at home, maybe the same house we'd once shared, watching her phone light up with news alerts and text threads that didn't include her anymore. A mutual friend messaged me late one night, she's trying to find a new firm. Nobody's biting. Too much noise around her name. I stared at that message longer than I should have. That was the part no one talked about. The loneliness after the storm. When the emails stop. When the calendar goes blank. When the silence becomes unbearable. And even though I had every right to feel triumphant, I didn't. Because what she lost wasn't just a job. It was everything she'd built her identity around. Her reputation. Her power. The one thing she had always valued more than anything, control, was gone. And I knew her well enough to know she didn't have a backup plan. Amber had always climbed. Every promotion, every spotlight panel, every award, she wore them like armor. But when the armor cracked, there was nothing underneath. She called once. Just once. A number I didn't recognize rang late on a Sunday night. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to the message, I knew the voice instantly. "Hey," she said. Just that at first. A shaky inhale. Then, "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that." "Okay. Bye." I played the message twice. Not because I was tempted to call back, but because I wanted to hear it. Hear the crack in her voice. The part where her breath caught. The way she said everything like it weighed more than she could carry. But I didn't call back. Instead, I deleted the message and turned off my phone. There's a version of the story where I gloat. Where I call mutual friends and say, "See. Told you." Where I bask in the karmic symmetry of it all. But that's not the version I lived. What I felt was emptiness. Not satisfaction. Because betrayal doesn't balance out just because the betrayer stumbles. Amber's fall didn't lift me. It didn't validate me. It just confirmed what I already knew. We had both lost something irreversible. Her downfall was just proof that she'd been willing to destroy more than just our marriage. She destroyed herself too. And in a strange way, that made me mourn all over again. I didn't talk about it much. Not to friends. Not to family. Not even to the woman I was starting to spend time with, Clara, a project manager I'd met at the firm. She was kind. Grounded. Didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. We got coffee one afternoon. Then lunch the next week. Then we started staying late together, not because we had to, but because it felt like a quiet safety I hadn't known in a long time. Clara had this way of making silence feel calm, not heavy. And I didn't talk about Amber even when I knew Clara could sense something deeper behind my eyes. She didn't push. That's what I liked most about her. She didn't try to solve me. She just sat with me in whatever space I was in. One night, weeks after Amber's message, I walked to the balcony of my apartment, wine glass in hand, and looked out over the city. Lights flickered in thousands of windows. People living lives I'd never know. Lives that might look perfect, might feel stable, until something broke. I wondered where Amber was at that exact moment. If she was staring at a screen, refreshing her inbox. If she was scrolling through old texts. If she was imagining what I'd say if she called again. But I didn't wonder for long. Because the truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I didn't need her to suffer to feel better. I didn't need her career to collapse or Steven to disappear. I had already healed more than I thought possible. Because I had learned something she never did. Power doesn't come from attention or status or ambition. It comes from peace. And I had found mine. It had been over 2 months since I last heard her voice. By then, the pieces of my life had started finding new places to belong. My apartment didn't feel temporary anymore. The work I was doing was gaining traction. Clara and I had quietly, cautiously started building something not dramatic or urgent, just honest. She was patient with my silences, never digging where I hadn't given permission. And then, out of nowhere, Amber reached out again. A text. From an unfamiliar number. "Hey, it's me. I know I don't deserve a reply. But I just wanted to ask, would you ever be open to talking?" No expectations. I just miss your voice. I miss you. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because part of me wanted to feel more than I did. She missed my voice. She missed me. But what she didn't seem to understand was that what I'd become wasn't someone waiting to be missed. I had changed. Quietly. Thoroughly. Completely. I didn't owe her anything. Still, I answered. Not out of bitterness, not out of affection, just truth. I hope you find peace, Amber. But I'm not looking back. Take care. I didn't block her. I didn't report her number. I just left the door closed. And that was enough. The pain didn't leave the day I saw her with Steven. It didn't leave when I packed my bags. Or when I found out about her career unraveling. Or when she finally texted to say she missed me. It left when I realized I no longer needed to ask why. I didn't need closure. I didn't need apologies. I didn't even need to understand how it all fell apart. Because I was already standing in what I had rebuilt. My life had become something new, not better in the flashy, social media kind of way, but richer. Softer. Honest. There were still hard days. Triggers. Random memories that stung. But they passed like summer storms now. Brief, loud, and gone before they could ruin everything. People ask if I hate her. I don't. I don't feel anything for her anymore, and that's what real healing looks like. Not rage. Not revenge. Just peace. The kind that settles deep. Because I didn't get even. I just got free.